We've heard quite a lot on the television in the last few weeks about the importance of risk assessments, and we've heard that businesses can reopen when they've done a risk assessment, and councils can open community centres when they've done a COVID-19 reopening risk assessment. Playground equipment and outside gym, you've got to do a risk assessment. So it's been quite a lot in the news, which is good from my point of view. And we've also heard a bit about personal risk assessments, which the government denied. But I think that will come in next year, where we'll be looking at people's ages and underlying health conditions. So with risk assessments, we all make decisions every day based on our own risk appetite. Crossing the road is the best example, I think. And when you're standing at the curb, you're thinking, how urgently do I need to cross this road? How wide is the road? What's the condition of the road? How quickly can I cross the road? How busy is the road? And you're doing all these factors in your head, and that is really a generic risk assessment. So you don't write it down, otherwise you'd never get anywhere in life if you had to write down every risk assessment for crossing the road. But you're basically doing a risk assessment. And so everyone does them every day, in my view. So why is there a reluctance to do a risk assessment? When I normally do this face-to-face at conferences and seminars, and I get onto the section to do with risk assessments, and I can hear a low groan or muttering in the audience. Now, luckily, you've all been muted today, so I can't hear that collective groan. But I normally ask people at the end of the session, you know, what is it that you've got against risk assessments? You know, I normally pick out the ones I've heard groan slightly. And I get a number of different answers, but the main ones I get are that people have got a lack of confidence in doing a risk assessment. You've all come from different backgrounds, so you've never probably had to do risk assessments before. So, you know, all of a sudden you're being asked to do them or check them over and things, and it's kind of a new thing for you. So there is that lack of confidence. Some people tell me that they think it's just a tick box exercise, and once they've done it, it's filed away once completed. So, you know, how important is it really? Some people have said to me, what is the point when no one's going to read it? You know, we do it and I file it away electronically or whatever, and that's it. And the other reason I get is that people think they don't think it's necessary. They've thought about the risks, like when you're crossing the road, they've put in the measures and that's it. They don't need to write them down. So, you know, fair enough, that might pass some things, but I'm going to explain why risk assessments, ideally, you know, should be written down. So I've heard all those excuses and many others as well. But I want to first put you in a position that I found myself in as an insurance manager in the past and a liability adjuster. When an incident occurs and, say, a member of the public wishes to sue the council, and I was at Leicester City Council when we were getting 2 or 3 a week of people tripping over potholes, mainly paving slabs, that kind of thing. So, and we dealt with them all in-house. We didn't pass them to insurers. We dealt with all the claims. So I've seen a hell of a lot of claims. And the first thing that happens, it could be an employee as well, but mainly a member of the public, is you get a letter of claim from the solicitors who are acting on behalf of the injured party. Now, that letter of claim, and this happened to me again on Thursday or Friday of last week, where a council rang up absolutely distraught that the solicitor's letter they received has got 2 pages of allegations against breach of this regulation, about breach of this, breach of that. And they run a pretty tight council, but they were being alleged by this solicitor of all kinds of things. And I've said to her, as I've said to many people in the past, don't worry about that. That is the solicitor's job, to throw as much mud as possible. And if one bit sticks, then maybe they'll get a settlement for their client. So don't take it to heart, as this person did last week, because, you know, I see it every day with letters of claims. And there will be all these allegations, but there will also be a list of documents that you have to disclose to the claimant solicitors. It's by law, you can't pick and choose which ones you want to send. And it could be meetings that you've had, council meetings to do with health and safety, but anywhere where, say, they were injured in play equipment, any meeting notes where the play equipment was mentioned, all that's got to be disclosed. But the number one document that will be on this list will be, provide me with a copy of your risk assessment. Now, if you can't do that, It doesn't mean the claim gets paid, but it puts your insurers on the back foot, because it looks like you haven't really thought about the risks and things you may have done. But if you haven't got a risk assessment, it puts your insurers really on the back foot. And I've seen in the past solicitors asking for risk assessments for opening a gate or going up the stairs, all kinds of things. That's mainly because they use a draft letter and they're going to ask for a risk assessment no matter what happened. I'm not expecting you to have risk assessments for every single activity you do, but I'll get onto that more later on. So what's the worst thing that can happen if you haven't got a risk assessment? Well, it raises the chances of that claim getting paid, and it could be a situation where it could easily be defended with a risk assessment. It could be someone trying it on. We've all seen, well, you may have all seen claims where people are trying it on, where it's their own stupid fault, and they put in a claim, and we don't like getting those claims paid. I defend them as far as I can. The other thing that could happen is you could get a bit of bad PR in the local papers. The local paper to me, where I'm in lockdown, Leicester, very anti-council. So any story they can leap on to have a go at the council, they will do that. You could get an increase in insurance premiums because a claim gets paid. To be honest, it would have to be a pretty large claim or a lot of small claims for a premium to increase, because the whole reason about insurance is that it's all pulled together. So unless you had a very big claim, it shouldn't really increase the insurance premiums, but that's a possibility. And obviously the worst thing that could happen is someone gets killed, and more of that later on. Certainly the first example I give you relates to a fatality. Now, I'm going on to now what I call the good risk assessment, out of the good, the bad and the ugly. When I was at Leicester City Council, so I was the risk insurance and claims manager, or some fancy title. They gave me a bigger title each year. Rather than a wage rise, they just give you a bigger title. And I got a phone call, I remember it very well. It was a Tuesday morning, and what happened was a tree surgeon had fell out of a tree in Abbey Park in Leicester. He fell about 80 foot and he was dead. Now, Leicester City Council is quite a small area. It's very well populated, but it's a very small area. So I was able to get down to the park fairly quickly, just as the body was being taken away. Ironic, the councillor was also, the employee was also a councillor of the council. And the first thing that happens whenever there's a death in the workplace is the police look at, is there corporate manslaughter here? Is there gross negligent manslaughter? Deaths in a workplace, that's something they look at. They'd already taken away 2 witnesses who were also employees of the council to the police station to ask them some questions. Now, these people were pretty distraught, as you can imagine. They've just witnessed one of their colleagues die or be seriously injured, and they were being taken to a police station, which cannot be very nice at all. Now, also arriving on the scene was a solicitor that I'd instructed to come along to attend the scene, and 2 heads of departments had turned up. I think one was trees and woodlands and one was parks and open spaces, something like that, because this was an employee of both theirs, and they both knew him very well as well. Now, the police were trying to get these 2 heads of department along as well, thinking about corporate manslaughter, and wanted to take them to the police station. Luckily, the solicitor arrived and told these 2 heads of department that they did not need to attend the police station. We always presume when we're asked by the police to go to the police station to give a statement that you have to. I don't know what regulation it is, but the solicitor was able to say they don't need to attend yet. Things can get said in the heat of the moment at the time of something like this, and it only needs one comment like, oh, it's the cutbacks or something like that, and the council could have faced a very serious situation. The police were quite keen on getting people to go to the police station, because when they'd examined the body, the harness had been cut all the way down the middle. When they saw the scene of the crime, the scene of the incident, they saw the harness there and it had all been cut. The body had been taken away. So they were thinking, right, okay, corporate manslaughter. Luckily, in this instance, the health and safety executive who investigate all fatalities were only a few miles away doing an inspection at a Leicester factory, and they attended the scene and they spoke to the paramedics, and it was determined that the harness had been cut by the paramedics to get the body quickly out of the harness. So that quickly diffused the situation a bit. The HSE and the police decide who's going to proceed with the investigation, and the HSE took over the control of this. And as they were doing their examination, they went to the Land Rover of the deceased, and in the glove compartment they found the risk assessment. This is the good risk assessment, which had been completed and signed by the deceased on the day that this incident occurred. Now, with tree work, obviously it's very dangerous, and they have to complete a risk assessment every day because the high number of fatalities that occur in this industry. And that's because the terrain changes, the weather changes, the height and size of trees, the work they're doing changes. So they have to do a risk assessment every day. And this chap had done it properly. He'd done his risk assessment. Unfortunately, he tied his ropes to a dead branch, and then when he put his weight on it, it collapsed, and he unfortunately died. And as I said, the HSE are very thorough, and they got someone to go back up to the tree, 80 feet high up, and cut down the remaining part of the branch. They then bagged it, tagged it, and I had to sign to release it to them. So they are very thorough with their investigations. And one thing a lot of people don't know is when the HSE investigate, if they find any breach of the regulations, they will charge you for their investigation cost, which I think is about £120 an hour at the moment, including travel time. So you get hit with a big bill for the HSE actually just doing their job. So they found the risk assessment, and investigations proceeded. As a result of their thorough investigations they did at the council, they don't just look at the trees and woodlands area and their risk assessments and health and safety policies. They go through the whole of the council. They look at all departments' health and safety regulations, policies and risk assessments. That's the nature of the job. They don't just look into how this chap died. So they're very thorough, and luckily they didn't find any problems at Leicester, and a verdict of accidental death was given by the coroner. No charges were made by the Health and Safety Executive against the council. And we normally see with the HSE, when they find people, they used to be quite lenient with councils in that they thought it's the public money, therefore we're not penalising the council by hitting them with a large fine. That went out the window a couple of years ago, and now they treat councils the same as any other small or medium-sized business, and they will hit you with a big fine, which is not recoverable from your insurers, in the same way as a speeding fine isn't recoverable from your motor insurers. It's there to penalise you. So it's not something that can be covered under an insurance policy. So it's best to get things right in the first instance. Locally, round by us, there are two major car boot sales, and when the lockdown was released in Leicester, they both did risk assessments, COVID return to work risk assessments. And these two councils these two car boot sales, which were very similar in size and obviously rural, both came out with different solutions. One thought, yes, we can reopen, and the other one decided they couldn't. The reason I'm mentioning this is because you can do, two councils can do risk assessments, and you can come up with different answers, different results, and that's because people have different risk appetite. So what I'm getting at there is neither of these two risk assessments these car boot places did were wrong. It's just people have a different risk appetite and came up with different solutions. And last week I had a council who had an email from one of their members of the public who was querying why swings were alternately closed down. If you've got a set of, say, 4 swings, 2 were shut down, yet a neighbouring council had all theirs open. And they were querying why there was difference. And that's just because people have different views and attitudes and different solutions as well. And I said to this council, you're not doing anything wrong. Just go back to them, show them your risk assessment and say this is the alternative that you come up with. I'm sure there's some councils out there who haven't reopened their play equipment because they consider it's still dangerous. So there will be different results to people's risk assessments. So I'm going to go on to a bad one now. And again, this was a council who decided, in a way of saving money, to bring in the landscaping, which used to be done by external contractors, all very well, trying to save money, and thought this is something they could do. So the manager of that area did a risk assessment and basically just filed it away. So really talking about a big change in risk there, from not doing that kind of work to tree landscaping, which I've already mentioned can be quite dangerous, and general landscaping is higher than an office risk, that kind of thing. So what happened was there was a storm, lightning hit a tree, a branch was quite dangerous, and the landscaping team was sent out to sort it out. Now, the landscaping person saw the branch, got out his chainsaw and started using it from below, and lo and behold, the branch fell, struck his knee, sustaining serious injuries, and it didn't work for 6 months. He then puts in a claim against the council, and you may think, well, stupid idiot, why is he cutting a branch from below? But the investigation revealed that the worker hadn't seen the risk assessment, and on that risk assessment, one of the mitigation measures was that if the job is too dangerous for you and outside your area of expertise, then you do have the authority to instruct external contractors to come in and do this job. Now, because this chap hadn't been trained in the use of sawing equipment and he hadn't seen the risk assessment, then from an investigation point of view, that was quite straightforward, in that claim will be paid because the risk assessment hadn't been shared with the team. They didn't know what they could and couldn't do, and they had to pay that claim. Another example I've got, which does not involve councils, was when I was a loss adjuster. I was sent along to like a woodworking company to investigate an incident where one of their employees had lost a finger in a machine where the guard had been removed, and obviously a claim then followed, as invariably it will. And the guard had been removed by the employee. So you can start thinking, well, it's his own fault then, this is one to defend. But again, he'd removed the guard because he could work faster without the guard there, and the bloke was on, he got paid more the more work he did. So obviously he removed the guard. The thing with this is he removed the guard a couple of years ago, so long ago that no one could find the guard when I was there. And he was supervised, as all the employees were, and the supervisor knew there was no guard, and he hadn't told the employee to put it back on because he was also on this bonus scheme. If his employees hit a certain figure, then he got his bonus as well. So everyone there, including the management of this person, knew he didn't have a guard on, yet they still let him carry on working. This is a common problem you have with this kind of industry, where the faster you work, the more you get paid. You do get more injuries. A sort of common, more recent development we've seen is delivery drivers. Now, you see the way they're racing around on the white vans. I think 2 have gone by since I started this presentation past my house. And the more parcels they deliver, the more money they get paid, or the quicker they finish for the day. So they are actually racing around all over the place. And a lot of these companies have problems getting motor insurance. The Royal Mail is not insured by a bona fide insurance company. It has to be insured by the Crown, because the nature of that motorist, no insurance company can touch it. So again, we see this, the faster you do a job, the more likely it is you could get injured. So this investigation revealed, again, the worker hadn't seen the risk assessment. The MD, the managing director of the company, when I said, can I see the risk assessment, said yes, no problem. Got it out of the cabinet. It wasn't an electronic one. And I don't think he blew dust off the risk assessment, but in my memory, it seems like he did. But when I saw the risk assessment, it was kind of yellow, the paper was yellow, and the writing on it was actually typed. I can't remember the last time anyone used a typewriter in modern day offices, but that shows how old the risk assessment was. And don't forget, this document has to be disclosed to the other side, and they would see straight away that it's a very old document which hadn't been reviewed. And again, with this risk assessment, it hadn't been shown to the employee or the supervisor, who would have seen that the guard needs to be on the machine at all times except when being cleaned or maintained, at which point the machine can be shut down. So from a point of view of defending that claim, you can't. That claim would, again, has to be paid, and probably 10, 15, 20,000 pounds would be paid out by insurers for that claim. As I said, we give a copy of the risk assessment to the solicitors. They can see that guards are meant to be on the machines. The guards weren't. Therefore, the company is to blame. So that is an ugly risk assessment, if you like, because it was yellow and typed and all that kind of thing. So what I've done recently is, during lockdown, is I've done quite a lot of generic risk assessment templates for companies for reopening of their businesses, their offices. I've done it for charities and volunteer groups. I've done it for councils. I've done one specific for reopening of playground areas, swimming pools, indoor and outdoor gyms, community centres, all these kind of things. They're all on our website, BHIB Council's website. They're all free of charge, and you don't have to be clients of ours either. If you have difficulty in trying to locate them, then get in touch with me, or drop an email to Helen, who pass it on to me, and I will get those, whichever one you're after, sent to you. The one particularly about reopening of premises is quite lengthy, because I wanted to cover everything in there that you need to think about. Some of it may not be applicable, in which case you can just delete those bits, but I wanted it to be very thorough, and I've put in quite a few links there to government websites, which are all still up to date, which even shows you how you should be correctly washing your hands, that kind of detail. So, and they've proved very popular. I think they've had over 2,000 downloads last time I looked. So have a look on our website for those. I know one of the areas that people struggled with during the release of lockdown was the government guidance for outside gyms actually said, if feasible, you should have a booking system for outdoor gym equipment. Now, this is the kind of stuff that's normally positioned in the open fields and that kind of thing. And obviously booking is not really possible for something like that. But if you read the guidance, it said, if feasible. Now, it's not feasible unless you position some individual there with a pen and paper all day, and that's not feasible. So you don't need to do that, but you need to look at other measures, but I'll get on to shortly. So that's the risk assessments that I've done specifically relating to COVID, which is the subject everyone's talking about really at the moment. Competent person. Now, people have said to me, I've never done one before, I don't know where to begin, that kind of thing, which is why I've helped out with templates, because I don't like filling out templates for people and giving them an actual copy of what one should look like, because it doesn't help people think their own problem through, and every council's going to have a different situation. So I've done a template which is detailed as possible, but it still needs you to do some thinking and amending and removing and all this kind of thing. But going back to a competent person, it does say on the HSE website, Health and Safety Executive, which is my first point of call whenever I have a query relating to health and safety matters. It's got everything on there, I think. It says that the risk assessment must be completed by a competent person. And people read that and they say, so what is a competent person? It's the same as in legal speak, what is reasonable? It's left deliberately open and wide, so that people can interpret it, in different ways. And with competency, the HSE website describes a competent person, and I'm going to read this verbatim really, is someone who has sufficient training and experience or knowledge and other qualities that allow them to assist you properly. The level of competence required will depend on the complexity of the situation and the particular help you need. Now, I remember one councillor who did the playground inspections for his council said, I've got no qualifications, I've had no training, but I've got 30 years experience in doing this. Now, to me, 30 years experience is very good and would be enough for something as low risk as that. Now, if we were talking about reopening of a chemical plant or something like that, then I'd say really qualifications are going to be necessary and a lot of training. So what is the risk? And that will determine how competent you need to be. But it's quite specific in that it says you don't have to be qualified in health and safety or risk management to do a risk assessment. You need a modicum of training and experience. So this kind of presentation will help towards your training to do risk assessments, which I'll get onto in a minute. there are plenty of courses out there. If you're finding that you're doing loads of risk assessments, you know, on a weekly basis, and you need more training, there are IOSH training courses, NEBOSH training courses, but I don't think it's necessary if you're doing 1 or 2 a year, or just checking over someone else's risk assessments. That kind of training and qualifications is overkill, in my view. So we move on to risk assessments, and as I've said, normally there's a low groan from the audience, but you're muted, so I can't hear that. If you look at any risk assessment, the first thing that should be put on there is, what is the hazard? I've had, in my experience, people putting that I've not done a risk assessment because there are no hazards. There are always hazards. An office is probably one of the lowest risk places that there can be, but you should still have at least 8 hazards on there, and probably as many as 12 or 13 if you're being particularly thorough. So the first column in any risk assessment is the hazard. So what kind of hazards do you get in an office? Slips and trips is probably the most common one. People tripping over damaged carpet, or falling downstairs because of a dodgy banister, tripping over wires from a projector, that kind of thing. So slips, trips and falls are probably the most common one you'll see on risk assessments. They're certainly the most common one you'll see in respect of claims I receive from offices, from councils as well. So slips and trips, but you can also get manual handling if people have got to carry a lot of paperwork around. I know our legal team at Leicester City Council had to take great big binders of files to court, and we're getting injuries, back injuries and wrist injuries and that kind of thing. So manual handling, display screen equipment, electricity, fire, they're all hazards which you should see on any risk assessment. So anyway, hazard in the first one. When I did the coronavirus risk assessment, there is only one hazard, and that is spread of coronavirus. That's the one thing that I'm doing in that risk assessment. The next columns are all completely full of various suggestions and things, but there's only one hazard on my risk assessment because it's specifically tailored to do with avoiding the spread of COVID. So the second column in the risk assessment is who might be harmed and how. So there you put there, is it employees going to be injured? Is it contractors? Is it members of the public? Is it all three? You need to put in there who is going to be targeted in respect of these. Now, I've seen a lot of risk assessments where everyone's just put down everyone. Anyone can be injured, employees, contractors, blah, blah, blah. But if it's, say, you've got a fragile roof, corrugated, or there's a skylight, you're probably going to get contractors up there. So you don't really need to put employees. You're not going to send employees up onto the roof. So that would just be contractors. So put in there who it is that you're trying to protect in respect of this risk assessment. As I said, employees, contractors, members of the public. With coronavirus, I also put in vulnerable people as well with underlying health conditions, because they need additional measures that you would need to put in place for a normal member of the public or a normal employee without underlying health conditions. So I went a bit further on the COVID one. The third column, and there's 7 columns altogether, the third column is what are you doing already? Now, unless you've just built a new office, and you will be doing measures already. So with regards to slips, trips, you may have a cleaner come in once a day. With electricity, you may do pat testing. With stress, you may have access to counsellors, a free phone number or something like that. There's a number of measures that you are probably already doing. So you put in that box what you're already doing, because that shows what you've done already, what measures are in place. And that then moves us to the fourth column, which is what further action is necessary. What additional things have you determined would reduce that risk even further? Now, ideally, you should remove the risk, but we will never go anywhere if we remove our risk. If we all just stayed at home, then we won't get injured in the office. If we never cross the road, you're removing the risk, but we've got to move. Life goes on, and you've got to cross that road. So you can't always remove the risk entirely. If you had a lot of risks relating to landscaping, gardeners and things, one way of removing the risk is to outsource it. But obviously there are financial resources considerations or something like that. But most of these things, you're not going to get rid of the risk entirely. We see slips and trips all the time, even if you've got a brilliant risk assessment, you've done this, that and the other. So what further action is necessary? So with electricity, you may already be doing PAT testing, but what about additional measure of fixed electrical testing? With any business premises over 5 employees, you need to do a fixed electrical testing, which is more invasive check on your electricity. And that needs to be done every 5 years. And that's not something that a lot of people know about. So you could do that with regards to slips and trips, and particularly with COVID, you may decide that your cleaners come in twice a week, twice a day. So you put in there what measures you think will reduce that risk even further. I'm just trying to think of, so electricity, slip, trips and falls. With stress, you could probably send the managers on a stress management course so they can identify stress more. So the fourth column is other measures which you want to put in place to reduce that risk even further. The fifth column then is action by whom. If you just put down these measures and said, yes, this needs to be done, this needs to be done, whatever. If you don't identify who should be carrying out these additional measures, then it could fall down between the cracks and it won't get done. So, and people do ask me, do I put in the name of the individual or do I put in the title? Well, I would say put in the title, because people do change over the years. And if you've got the title there, if that identifies one individual, then that is fine. You can put down the name of the person there. That's entirely up to you. But I mean, just remember that if they leave, that you need to update the risk assessment. So you put in there whether it's the HR manager or the manager or the staff or whoever needs to carry out this action. That's what goes in column 5. Column 6 is action by when. Now, this is your own determination of how quickly the additional measure should be put in place. Now, this should be commensurate with how risky the situation is, what you've identified as something, and the time on that should be related to one, how risky it is, and secondly, how long it's going to take you to put in place. So if it's training or occupational health needs to come in, that may take a few months to get it passed through budgets and then get it coming in. So, you can put in 3 or 6 months. That's entirely your choice. I have seen, particularly when I've done surveys with insurers, they put action by when, as in now, as in today, because they could find a fire exit blocked or something like that. So they would insist that that's removed immediately. So there may be some things that you identify that are very dangerous and need to be done straight away. Other than that, it's what time you're comfortable with relative to how dangerous it is. If you see unexposed wires, you'd expect that to be done in like 24 hours and not, I'll give it 3 months for the electrician to get out. So put in there what you're comfortable with, action by when. So if anyone looks at this and say, a worst scenario, someone gets injured and it's on your risk assessment that you were going to do something which would probably have stopped that incident occurring, then you can say, well, I gave myself 3 months to do that because I need to get approval, I need to get this, that and the other, then I need to get somebody in. You may be sort of questioned as to why that time limit was so long. As I said, if you put in a reasonable period of time in there, then that's fine. The last column on the risk assessment is the date of completion to show that you've completed the additional risks that you've identified, and putting a date there as to when that was done. Now, it could be, and we've seen this quite a lot recently because of COVID, that the measures identified were not carried out, because if you're expecting contractors to come in to do something, I know of one council that, one company that had built a mezzanine floor. They needed to put railings around it to stop people falling off it, and they were given a month to do that by insurers. And they actually put in there that they needed 4 months because no one was allowed in their area to carry out the job. That's fine, as long as you put in there the reason for why it was not done and put another date in there. Insurers would have no problem with that, and anyone investigating an incident would fully understand that COVID has caused quite a lot of people's delays on things that they need to do. So in there, you put in the date, and I would suggest you electronically diary to remind the people who to carry out these tasks, to remind them that they've got to be done within the time limit. So that's the risk assessment. One of the things that should also be on the risk assessment is the date that the risk assessment was carried out. That's very important. As I said, one of the investigations I mentioned earlier on, there was no dates on there. There was no date of when it was to be reviewed, and there was no signature on there as well. It was just a typed document. So you need the date that you carried out the risk assessment, the date that you need to review it, and who it is who's done the risk assessment. Now, with the review date, and I am asked this quite a lot, how often should we review the risk assessment? Well, it depends on how dangerous the area is. I mean, if you're talking about a normal office, I would say once a year is perfectly acceptable to review your risk assessment. Now, you need to diary that as well, that, you know, a year electronically, a year, because it goes by so quickly. But if there are any changes during that year, say you move premises or you take on additional risks or you take on extra people, then it would probably be good governance to review the risk assessment at that point, because there may be other risks that have come into play. So at that point, it's worth reviewing your risk assessment. But normally, I would say once a year, and at that end of year, it's probably just a matter of reading through it, and 99% of the time, it's the same risks as last year. There are changes in technology all the time, so you know things can change, but that's why you need to review it. And once you've done that review, then obviously change the dates to show that you have reviewed it, and a new review date for the next year. So that's the actual date of the risk assessment. Now, one of the questions that came up, I normally go into the question and answer bit at this stage, but one of the questions that came up on probably the first 5 of these presentations I did was to do with working from home and risk assessments in relation to that. Now, I know a lot of clerks already work from home, so with COVID, it wasn't really a big change in that they just carried on as they were, but there are a lot more people who are working from home. And, you know, I've been asked the question, well, I normally get asked, are we meant to go out and look at their workstation? What are we meant to do? And I looked into that, and the HSE website is quite clear on this. They do not expect the employer to go out and examine every workplace of all their employees. It may be possible in respect to small companies, small councils, that type of thing, but they don't expect it. They don't think, you know, people have resources to go along and look at every single employee. But what you've got to remember is that the council's employers all have a duty of care for their employees, whether they're working in an office, whether they're working from home, or whether they've gone off-site and gone to visit somebody else. That duty of care does not change at any point in that. So there is that risk there, in that if someone was injured at home whilst working from home, what has the employer done to assess the risk, you know, to make sure that there is a duty of care? So normally that would be done by carrying out an inspection, but you're not expected to carry out an inspection. So how do you square that circle, if you like? And I found the best way to do this is to ask your employees who are working from home, be it temporary or permanent, to carry out a display screen equipment self-assessment form. Now, I will, after I've done this presentation, I'll send one to Helen in case anyone is interested in that. And that is just the employer sending out that form to their employees and asking them if they're comfortable with their work environment. Have they got their screen at the right height? Is there any glare issues? Have they got the right equipment? You know, are they suffering any slight strains or strains? We at BHIB are already seeing claims from companies, from employees who are injured whilst working from home with repetitive strains and that kind of thing. At the moment, I've had no council one, but that's just a matter of time. And we're seeing people who, and they're going to be difficult to defend if no self-assessment test or any examinations have been carried out of the workplace, because there is a duty of care. And the first thing the solicitor can say is, well, you don't know how they're working, you don't know what equipment they've got, etc., etc. So this form basically asks all the employees, are they comfortable with the equipment they've got? And if not, what do they need? I know one council said to me is, we don't want to ask our employees that because they may come back with a whole list of things that they want. That's really like burying your head in the sand, because if they did get injured, repetitive strain, carpal tunnel syndrome, whatever, again, we're on the back foot in trying to defend that claim. So we're already seeing claims. A lot of people who used to work at offices are working from home, and we're seeing strains and people requiring physio and all this kind of thing. So a way to help defend the council on claims for that is to get this self-assessment form sent to the employees, get them to fill it out, sign it, send it back, and then you need to have a look through that assessment form to make sure there isn't anything you can help them with, whether it's a risk pad or whatever that assessment comes out. Now, as I've said, I'm historically from a insurance claims background, and the first document I would use if an employee said they were injured at work is a self-assessment form they've completed where they say they've got all the equipment they need, they have no issues, that kind of thing. That would be a very valuable document, and it ticks the box in respect of duty of care for your employees. So that's the self-assessment form, and I'll make a note to send a copy to Helen, and she can then send it out to anyone who requires that form. So I mentioned that because, as I said, it came up in a lot of presentations I was doing when I was doing the question and answers. But I'll now get on to the questions and answers. I think I saw some pop up, but feel free to ask me any questions on risk assessments, what I've talked about there, any COVID issues you've got that would be relevant to other councils as well. We will start going through some questions. Helen, if you've got any, I think I've seen some come through, but they were too quick for me to read them.
Yeah, if we see, we've got one, if we employ a company to undertake work for the PC, e.g. tree work, should we see their risk assessment?
Yes, you should see their risk assessment, their method of working, that kind of thing. If they're a proper bona fide company, they'll have all that ready. In addition to that, you should ask for a copy of their public liability certificate. It's a one-page document which shows that they have cover in place, and it shows that the dates, it'll have the dates on there so that you will be able to satisfy yourselves that the company who are going out there doing work, if they injure a member of public, are insured. I had a case at Leicester City Council where we had some roofing contractors came in, they did some felt work, they caused £4.5 million worth of damage to a school, and they weren't properly insured. The claim was obviously paid by the council's insurance policy, but if they'd done some checking with that company beforehand, that claim should have gone to the contractor's insurance. So that council is now left with a £4.5 million claim on their policy through no fault of their own. So you should not just ask for risk assessments, but copy of insurance, copy of their method statement. And as I said, companies are asked every day for those kind of documents. So if they start prevaricating or saying they haven't got them, then I would question why you're using somebody like that. It's not for you to do the risk assessment, it's for them. They know what risks they are carrying out and doing. So it is for the company to do themselves. That's the answer to that one.
Okay, in relation to employees and clerks, you mentioned the workstation assessment. Would this also be required of councillors as volunteers? So would they need to do a risk assessment?
From what I understand, councillors aren't employees as such. So if that's right, Helen,
they're not. Yeah.
So no, I mean, I don't know whether you provide them with equipment already, or how you go about that. But there's no harm in doing it, and you can say that you're just checking to make sure that they've got everything. So if you supply their equipment and they're working solely on that equipment for the council, then there could be some duty of care come back to you, especially if they're, as you said, they're acting as volunteers rather than doing their own thing. There's no harm in sending it to them, but it's not, I certainly haven't seen any claims for that ever. So it's kind of low on the risk threshold, but no harm in asking them to do it.
Okay, if a village hall has done their own COVID risk assessment, does the parish council who hold their meetings there have to do their own as well?
No, not really. What they need to do is see the risk assessment done by the village hall to make sure that there's nothing there that worries them, there's no gaps or anything like that. It's the property owner's role to carry out that risk assessment, but you just need to see it just to make sure that the risk assessment isn't putting something back on the people who hire the village hall for them to do. I've seen one where the risk assessment from the village hall said that cleaning must go on throughout the day, and someone was hiring it for the whole day, and if they hadn't seen the risk assessment, they wouldn't have known that duty was on them. So the risk assessment could put things back on the hirers to do. So as long as you see the village hall risk assessment and you comply with it and do any measures that you're asked to, then that's fine.
Okay. With tree work, does each employee of the company on site need to show their qualifications for their employee liability to be valid?
So that's an employee of the council, did you say there, Helen?
It's a company, so a company's doing the work and the employees of the company doing the work, I think. Okay,
so obviously external contractors, whenever you're taking external contractors on board, obviously where I was at Leicester City Council, we had a list of approved suppliers. So you may not go to that kind of level because you may not be using that much, but whenever you are requesting what may be a new contractor to carry out work for you, the same as the previous question, you need to see a copy of their insurance and ask for it every year annually because it's only a 1-year policy. And you must ask to see risk assessments and qualifications where relevant. I think when you're doing tree surgeon work, you need to employ people who are qualified. It's very dangerous. I think we lose 2, 3, 4 tree surgeons a year from fall from height. So it is very dangerous, and it's good governance to check that you know you're employing a company that is qualified. As I said, how far do you go? Do you ask to see those qualifications? Do you ask to see the insurance policy document? No, you're only expected to do what is reasonable. And so ask for a copy of the insurance policy, which is a 1-page document, the schedule. And if they say that they are all qualified in tree surgeon things, you know, how far do you go? Do you ask to see the certificates, and then do you check to make sure they're bona fide? You know, you're only expected to do what is reasonably expected of you. So I would ask if they're qualified, and if they tell you they are, then if at the end of the day something happens and they're not, then they've basically lied to you. So that would be all you would need to do.
Okay. How do we find what type of items should be on a risk assessment for a newly acquired common land area that includes a vehicle track and river access?
Well, when you start doing a risk assessment, you have a look around the area. So if it's an office, you walk around the office. If it's a new area you've got, then whether you would need to do a risk assessment specifically for that piece of land, that may be a bit of overkill unless there are a lot of risks on it. But it would need to probably be incorporated in your own risk assessment that you have for your land and your properties and that kind of thing. How often do you inspect them? You know, how often do you maintain them? How often do you inspect trees? That kind of thing. So it'd probably be, unless it's a very large piece of land with lots of things going on, you probably wouldn't need to do a risk assessment specifically for that land, but you would probably need to incorporate those new risks that you're taking over into your original risk assessment that you've got and make it clear that that is specific to that piece of land on that risk assessment. That's probably all you'd need to do.
Okay. We manage 2 buildings. Do we need to have a water risk assessment and a Legionella water testing as it isn't on the HSE building checklist?
Okay, well, if I'm just trying to think, really, the highest risk there is if you've got showers in the building, because if they don't get used for a few weeks, and this is something I highlighted to a lot of companies, when they were going back into work, and including our own office. We've got a shower in our office for people who are cycling or running at lunchtime, and the shower hadn't been used for many months. So we needed to get that checked out and cleaned by a professional company. You don't need a specific risk assessment just related to water risks, but in your normal office risk assessment, and it's certainly in my COVID one, is the threat of Legionella and what are you doing to reduce the risk. So if you've got a shower or any hot water in there, then it should be well flushed and probably checked out by someone who maintains and services that equipment at the beginning of when you reopen again after a period of time. Legionella is a threat. I have seen something in the last week of an outbreak of Legionella. I don't think that at that point had determined where it had come from, but they will, as in the large Barrow case where a few hundred people got Legionella from a water containment site. It is still a high risk, and people forget about it because of COVID. But I was very concerned about the threat of Legionella with all these companies reopening. So don't need to do a specific one; just needs to be one line on your risk assessment.
Okay. So I've got someone asking. They have a community centre. So every time a group books the community centre, they are asking this group for a copy of their risk assessment and insurance. Is this a requirement or just good practice?
It's good practice, really. There's no law that says that. I mean, if you've got someone hiring your premises for a birthday party, then you're not going to insist they do a risk assessment. If it's some commercial activity that's going on, then, yes, you should ask for their insurance and that, because, I don't know what they're doing, but they could burn the place down or something. You want to move that risk to them in the event of an incident occurring. You would probably best show people hiring your hall or whatever it is your own risk assessment in case there's any duties. As a reverse to that question earlier on, when you're the owners of the building, you should be telling them they should regularly clean probably light switches and door handles. If they're hiring it for, say, 3 hours or something, they should be doing that during the course of their hire period. So I think that answers the question.
Okay, if we have volunteers in the village carrying out work, say like grass cutting or trimming grass in the village on parish-owned managed land, what actions should the PC take in respect of potential liability and risk? Okay,
well, it is dangerous. I've seen instances of council employees. I remember Leicester City Council had one. We had a big publicity to plant a load of trees, again in Abbey Park, a dangerous place in Leicester, where volunteers were asked to help plant trees, and one person dug a hole, stepped back to admire the hole they dug, and fell into someone else's hole. And we had a claim within days on that because the woman had to cancel her holiday and, all that kind of thing. And you've got to treat volunteers the same as employees. If they're acting under the supervision and direct control of the council in what they're doing, then there is the potential of liability coming back to the council. If they just get on and do their own thing and there's no instruction from the council, then if an incident occurred, it would probably fall on the volunteer group if they get sued. So you may want to ask them if they've got insurance, especially if they're a legal entity, they could be sued. An example I give on this is a theatre group who hired a hall from a council, and one of their volunteer actors tripped over one of the props on the stage, broke his leg, and made a claim against the council. The council said, well, hold on a minute, there's no defect with the council property here. You have to sue the theatre group, which is correct, because the actual negligence in that case was someone tripping over a theatre prop directly related to the theatre group. So that claim was redirected from the council to that theatre group, who were not insured. And the last I heard, the organiser, the chairman of that theatre group, was being sued personally for about 80 grand. So if someone is doing something like that, at least make them aware of the potential risks. It is high level risk, not the highest level, but when people are working on the side of the road, it is a dangerous place. and if they're using specialist equipment as well, scythes or whatever to cut grass and hedges, then it is more dangerous than a normal activity. So you've got to inquire on what are they actually doing to reduce the risk. Have they done a risk assessment, etc. Maybe a bit overkill, but otherwise you'll see the claim coming to you.
Okay, this is sports pavilions. COVID regulations now permit use of changing rooms. Do we need to do our own risk assessment if the football club have provided one from the FA?
Okay, well, if you look at the risk assessment and it sort of covers all the things that you'd be concerned about, then I don't think you'd probably need to do one. If it's just purely the football club using it, if other clubs are using it, then you need to do your own to cover them, to make sure that they're aware of what you're doing by way of cleaning and things. But yeah, I've seen the FA one, which is quite is very good. So in respect of just that football club, you don't need to do a risk assessment on top of their risk assessment.
Okay, another one for common land. Should we have a specific risk assessment for historic common land? Inspectorate says level of risk can be higher.
I think it's just part of what you do with regards to inspection of your land and things. And judges get a bad name, but they are quite reasonable in what they expect. And I've seen cases where they've said we do not expect land to be like a bowling green everywhere. We do expect natural dips and holes and that kind of thing, and claim to have been chucked out. So I think you need to have inspection of it on there and see whether there's any particular hazards. Obviously if someone's dumping stuff on there on a regular basis, but I don't think of it as higher risk actually than normal land, to be honest with you. I'm trying to think of a reason why. I don't think it's a higher risk, but you've got to have something to say that you do occasionally look at that area, and the more rural it is and less used, the less inspections would be needed. Okay,
this is a good one. Do we need a risk assessment in place for bottle banks on our land and possibly other charity banks, I would think?
I've never seen one before, so I'm not going to start saying yes, you would need one. If you had a number of incidents that kept occurring at a bottle bank, such as a material bank, say arson, and that kept repeatedly happening, then maybe you need to think about what other measures you can put in place to reduce that. But if there's no problem with it, then don't create more paperwork just for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm. I think you've answered this one. A written risk assessment is required when there are more than 5 staff. Does this include counsellors or just staff on the payroll?
It would mean just employees.
Yes.
The thing with that is that I think some risks are there whether you've got 4 or 6 employees, and it's good governance to do a risk assessment, whether that's the legal requirement. So the HSE could potentially fine you or bring measures on you if you hadn't got a risk assessment when you've got over 5 employees. But I think there's still a lot of risks there, and maybe do a risk assessment even if you've only got 3 or 4 employees, because the solicitors, if a claim is made, it's the first thing they'll ask for. They will say, you could say, well, it's not a legal requirement to do that. And they'll say, well, yeah, but you can still do a risk assessment. Have you done one? And if you haven't, again, insurers on the back foot. So I do recommend that, people should do a risk assessment irrespective of how many employees they've got.
Okay. Should risk assessments be made public on a council website?
Well, you're asking for it really there, aren't you? As I said, this council last week put theirs on the website, and then obviously some member of the public was looking at all the risk assessments from different councils and then querying each council why they come up with different solutions. So it's certainly not a legal requirement. We all like transparency and open government and things, so it's not right or wrong to put it on there, but you are opening yourself up to people querying it. I would tend to only provide it if someone specifically asks, not necessarily freedom of information, but just someone asks to see it. I wouldn't open yourself up to it, but it's not wrong doing it.
Okay. Do we need to inform insurers of volunteers, or is it sufficient to have names recorded and dated?
Yeah, you don't need to tell insurers about anything that you would expect a normal council to do. If you started branching out, like Leicester City Council opened a MOT centre, they thought they could make some money out of that because they had all the employees who are engineers. That's something that's diverse away from what you'd expect councils to do. So that is when you need to tell insurers when you're doing a change in risk of something that is not what you would normally expect council business to be. So no, you don't need to tell them about volunteers you've got unless they specifically ask on the proposal form. Don't forget, all insurers are different. I know one insurer is saying that you must follow the government guidelines to the letter T, and the insurance company I deal with, Aviva, are not. They're saying it's perfectly reasonable for you to do your risk assessment and come up with your own solutions as to what to do. So insurance companies do vary, but I wouldn't expect any insurance company to insist on that kind of information being given to them.
Okay.